you. Thank you, Sue. So what our next part of the webinar this afternoon, we have about half an hour left, is I'm going to share just some examples, practical examples, as to how Multi-Academy Trust has implemented much of the intent of what Barry has spoken through. So because we've got half an hour, and actually I think what would be perhaps a really good use of quite a chunk of this time is any more questions, comments, the sharing of the good practice of the folk that we have in the space today. Much as Barry has said, you know, for us, it's about relationships. And whilst we will be working therapeutically to respond to the needs of our children, to our staff, and to be connected to self, we don't necessarily need to be trained to be therapists. The most powerful therapy is that relationship. And so we need to be, as much as possible, of acting from a space of self-awareness as opposed to self-defensiveness. And so maintaining, as the adults, a regulated state will be really important. And as Claire Dora mentioned earlier, and of course Barry's mentioned too, the importance therefore to really support our staff as we have gone through lockdown and as we reconnect and increase numbers in school is going to be absolutely fundamental. And certainly that's something that the trust with whom I work, the Embark Trust in Derby, a trust with 2 special schools, secondary and primary, in areas of rural Derbyshire, but also within Derby city centre. So a real interesting group of settings to respond to, that about how we reconnect, how we maintain connection with the staff, create the psychological security and safety to enable our staff to really share with us how they are feeling about what's happening so that we can anticipate and support. There's some research here that Barry has also mentioned. This is more around the research about bushfires in Australia and the impact on children, and how actually, because of the relational support that was given to the children when they were going through such adversity, it developed a greater resilience and a greater sense of bonds. We know in the settings that we work, when we're working through such adverse times, we recreate and reconnect with our staff teams in a very special and very deep way. And so as a result of that, we become so much stronger. We're talking about reconnecting. We're not talking about opening schools. Most of our schools have been open in some capacity, but we are moving towards reconnecting our whole entirety system again and moving towards a new normal. And again, Barry has mentioned about we don't want to go back to what was normal. We have learned so much from this experience, and there is so much that has been, yes, incredibly traumatic and sad, but also there has been the real glimmers of light and positivity that we can't not learn, the environmental impact being one of them. So of this, what do we want to take to feed into what the future will potentially be for our youngsters? So the opportunity to take this learning, and mental health, social emotional well-being, absolutely key to create the secure base from which our entire staff teams can effectively meet and serve those in our communities to enable the very best outcomes in both the short term and long term. I love, and people that know me know that I really love this sort of analogy, this metaphor of the Japanese art form kintsukuroi, that when something is fractured, when it's been through adversity and it's slightly broken as a result, let's not throw it away. Let's really value that and piece it back together with molten gold. So the result of that is that it becomes even more strong, even more resilient, even more of worth and of value, as it were. And to me, I see you guys, us, as that molten gold, those adults that we can draw back through connection, our school systems, and as a result they can go on to be even stronger. But standing together courageously to do that is absolutely key and pertinent. But also knowing we've been through a pandemic, huge issues. And we've got the stats around domestic violence, alcohol sales, all of the impact in terms of financial stability, the economy. It's just checking out for us, certainly with this academy, was and other schools that joined us, was what was the real lived experience of all of our stakeholders. And so whilst we've been in the same storm, we've all had our own boats, and they're very, very different. Although some of them may well be painted shiny beautifully on the outside, there's holes and maybe an oar missing or whatever it could be. So trying to get into the real lived experience of all of our stakeholders so that we can plan for and really inform our risk assessments with the lived reality of the specific needs that we need to work with within our school communities, which is why we wouldn't want the DFE to dot the I's and cross the T's, because they can't create a plan that would meet our needs in that way. It's up to us to find out and seek as near to the accurate reality of what's happened and to respond to that within our school systems. And with that, creating the thinking space. I think having worked with you, Barry, what you facilitate is that steadiness and that calmness, so that we don't respond from a fight, flight, freeze, reactive stance, but we breathe deeply, we regulate. We know if we respond from that reptilian, almost unconscious, subconscious response, we don't get up into social engagement, curiosity, desire for problem solving with each other, and then into cognition and thinking, logically planning. That doesn't happen for our children, and it certainly doesn't happen to us. So as the leaders, teachers, and as teachers, staff in school, we're all leaders, we're all learners, we're all teachers, making sure that we are as steady as possible by reaching out and say it's okay to not be okay, drawing support from each other. So when we go through our wobbly moments, we can be aware that there's folk there looking out for us, with us, and walking by our side. So for me, that the courage of vulnerability, showing up and saying, I am vulnerable. As a head teacher, as a leader, I am vulnerable because I do not have the answers to this. I am not an expert of this because this is a unique situation. But I am more vulnerable if we don't get as near to the authentic truth as possible. So please share your vulnerabilities with me, with us, so that we can respond to them. And that acknowledgement, I think, from our leaders throughout the entire culture and system is really, really important, so that we can show that vulnerability is not a weakness. Actually, we're going to need that as we tread gently through this journey over the next weeks, months, and indeed years. So as I said, with the 14 schools that we've been working with, and actually we're now using this as a model to work with the over 140 schools in South Gloucestershire, and also with schools in Wales we're sharing this with. It's kind of what is it that we want to do in terms of a journey through? And we picked up on some core areas that we wanted to really focus on, which led us into, with our school teams, starting to split up into sub-teams across the 14 schools. And not all head teachers took leadership of these teams. We identified folk that really had the commitment, the passion, that real positive attitude to make some of this stuff happen, and people that had the capacity, because quite frequently our heads were very, very busy doing other stuff, as it were. So the 9 teams that you see here, the first one is how do we stay connected through lockdown and into as we increase numbers in schools. And actually one of the head teachers did take a lead of this. It was a lead of the trust, and this was about communication over communication, really sharing as much information with everybody to keep everybody informed and a part of the journey. The second team was very much about staff. How can we support our staff here and now? Because the staff are our most important resource and most important folk involved in this, because we need our children to be important to them. And so thinking about training for staff about self-awareness, self-resilience, the biology of stress, the neuroscience, all of those the science behind this to really equip our colleagues with the understanding as to why we meet the children and the families with compassion, and how if we're not careful, unconsciously, subconsciously, when we're harbouring amounts of stress, it impacts our behaviour significantly. So the need for kindness, but with candour, to be very clear that we have people out there that will notice when I'm fine, thank you very much, and I can do this job and I can get on with it and all the rest of it, when actually the music, the pitch, the prosody, the tone behind my voice doesn't give that message out at all. In fact, it gives a very complicated, confusing message for other people that I'm saying I'm fine, but I'm giving other people a sense of something else, which impacts on the potentially safe psychological environment that we want to facilitate. Team 3 looked about how we could reach out through questionnaires, conversations with all of our stakeholders to get that lived or authenticity of experience, as it were. And they did this in a variety of different ways for some of our parents who had English as an additional language, some of our parents who were non-readers, some of our parents who had no fixed abode, and so needed to really carefully reach out to those. Some of our children on the autistic spectrum who needed social stories as a way to communicate their thoughts and thinkings, those with cognition and learning difficulties. So a real creative bunch, but that sat behind this was a way that as those information, those questionnaires were being responded to, they informed a database of information that would then inform Team 5, who were co-constructing the risk assessments that the schools would use. So the risk assessments were informed by the lived experience of across the trust, so we could pick out themes and respond in a cost-effective way, looking at what skills we had across those groups of staff, but also in a very bespoke way, with each school having their own needs identified and therefore informing the risk assessment. Ongoing support for staff, Team 4. I'm going to pop up to Team 7, looking at bereavement and loss in the short and long term, so very specialised resources and activities, and then looking at multi-agency support. Team 9, really focusing on ongoing, real, particularly support around those most senior leaders who are bearing the weight of the accountability of this and checking out that they're okay. Team 8 was all about how we can learn and pull out the positives of this experience and interweave them into what our new curriculum will be, and the new curriculum being as rich in hope and humanity as it is in knowledge. Whilst Team 6, which became our largest team, really worked on a whole library of resources for teachers. So activities that teachers could pull off the shelf out of the library, all resourced, all ready to go, to meet age and stage of children as they return back into school in their bubbles. And this is an example of the index at the front page of this resource library that we're hoping to get out to schools as soon as possible. And so each team had a subset within the library, as you can see there, and I've got some examples of Team 2 here, where we've got webinars for training for staff about the biology of stress, the neuroscience of learning. Team 3, where we've got those questionnaires so that staff can see those and other leaders can use those. And here we have, as I've mentioned, the Team 6 curriculum ideas. And you'll see that there's elements for Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, and so on. The thinking for this was that as teachers are planning for online learning, they're also planning for their bubbles of children, and they're also planning for children to be included into those bubbles as and when it's safe enough to do so, and those numbers of children increase. That's a huge amount of work for our teachers to potentially be thinking about. So to have a library of resources for age stage specific, equally if a child has experienced more sort of bereavement and loss, to be able to support in a creative way as possible, to have that ready for those staff would support them in their own social and emotional well-being, and also just infect that sort of potential for creative ideas and solution-focused approaches. So within that library, there's lots and lots of different activities, and these are just a few. For example, thinking about the short term and reconnect. So for the first 3 weeks, the schools have agreed that they won't go anywhere near sort of the academic subjects unless there's a request from children to do that, because some may really want to do that. But other activities, for example, every member in this trust and schools working with the trust will have a jigsaw piece that they will reflect on the hope and positivity, what they've enjoyed during lockdown, and then they will represent that on one side of the jigsaw. On the other side, maybe respond to things that they've lost over the time or things that they've missed. And as everybody comes back together, they create within the centre of the school a school mural showing the incredible diverse reconnection of people coming back into school. Another one of the schools is doing this pebble pathway where every child creates a pebble, a tree of hope, where they're putting messages on the tree of hope for people to walk through as and when it's safe enough to do so. Something that I had to share was actually now 2 head teachers have come to me and asked me if they thought they were being daft. One who had spent their time, it regulated them, making these friendship bracelets for their staff as they return to say thank you. And another who bought various chocolate bars as little gifts for their staff as they return with a little starfish. You may well have heard of the starfish parody. If you haven't, have a little look about making a difference to every child that you come into contact with. Things like that. And actually what that enabled was some of the teachers who went on to get these little cups from Sainsbury's and are then going to give those to their children as they come back in to celebrate that they've survived through this potentially traumatic time of not being connected with school. And so really, again, so taking out the positives. And as lots of those activities take place, what the children are currently being asked to do, as are some of the staff that are shielded, are to complete scrapbooks of their lived experience, so that they will be able to share their story when they come back to school, but also to share this piece of history and have it available for their children and their children's children, because this will be what their children's children will be studying when they're looking at history. And so you can see 3 different examples here, and I'm sure everybody is doing something very similar. One for more sort of key stage 3, 4, and one for key stage 1, key stage 2. But again, it's about age and stage. And so these scrapbooks of experience are then going together to inform what will become a celebration towards December or January, which is a co-creation for each school setting, creating a museum of experience which will incorporate experiences within their entire communities. Other activities that I've been sent some pictures last night from some of the first days of Bubbles in EYFS, where the staff have acknowledged they cannot socially distance these children. So in order to get them to wash their hands more frequently, they're taking them outside and getting them dirty. Absolutely fantastic, having a great time out there in the mud, enjoying, doing as much social distance as possible, but for most it's not. But they've got to wash their hands after they've been making mud cakes and things like that. And so enjoying that relational support, but cleverly thinking through, without frightening and big red and yellow tape saying don't go there, actually creating a way that we can ease into these new routines. And one of our very dear colleagues, Mary Rayner, whose special school was inspected virtually before opened yesterday, and that's her donkey there that she's got for children. And those children that came back yesterday were completely taken by just sitting and being able to hold and talk to the donkey. Nature, outside, and animals, all incredibly supportive. Children who were given pencil cases to decorate, to keep their own pencils and pens in, some examples there. One of the activities, and this is just one that I have an example that a group of teachers did for me once, that the children on a piece of paper just wrote little messages to each other about stuff that they appreciate about each other, and they had that to take away. Really, really quite special. More pebbles, sharing hopes and dreams, having these little miniatures. Some of our schools had little cat litter trays, 99p, or just trays in the classroom, and they asked the children to replicate what their lived experience was during lockdown using miniatures. No words needed, but that metaphor, psychological safety, and we don't know what they may well be sharing, but we'll get a sense of what the picture may look like. And then we've got retreat areas, some pictures of retreat areas, knowing that some of our children may go into meltdown or may explode as a result of that anxiety. So anticipating that and being ready for that, really, really important, having those safe places to go. And of course, those check-ins there, the zones of regulation, whatever it may well be that you're using to support children and adults, because one of these is in a staff room for adults, to really show and share how they're feeling. And of course, bits about the neuroscience, the window of tolerance, all of those kind of things. The thing with, I think that's been quite clever with this trust is whilst they've got all of those sort of standalone activities, which is all about exploring and narrating the shared experience, name it to tame it, if we can share and talk through our story, we're more likely to be able to move forward with it. But also that notion that the numbers of our children will get bigger, wanting to ensure that we've got purposeful activities. So part of this process, as we work towards the Museum of Hope and Humanity and the community involvement, is that those children who will be bringing back their scrapbooks, they will continue to sort of work on those scrapbooks whilst other children start to join the lessons. And so part of this is the transition back into the routine and structure of schooling. So those children will move towards more independent learning and self-directed with support, which means that the staff will be emotionally and more physically available to welcome those new children who will be joining the bubble. So, and do those other activities that our children will have, or who have already been in school will have completed. And what's also woven through this is peer-to-peer support and buddying system, both for the adults and for the children. This is an example of some of the other activities that the school staff will be working towards in terms of facilitating the museum. And the museum will mark almost an end point of this, that sort of celebration, but in a very ritualized approach of coming together, and other things like that, a song that they're developing, and a book of hope, where our parents, the children and staff have all been asked to write little pieces of poems or paragraphs to put into what will become a published book of hope. And reiterating here, we ignore the emotional needs of our children at our peril. Not just the emotional needs of our children, the emotional needs of our staff and us, ourselves as well. If we have one opportunity to get this as right as possible. If we don't, potentially we will be endeavouring to catch up for many, many years to come, particularly for our most vulnerable. These schools are also doing is working towards either individual maps for children, so mapping out a pathway, or paths, planning alternative tomorrows with hope, as children rejoin, but also as part of the celebration for the museum. And I know many of our colleagues do these in our schools already, thinking about, okay, what's our vision now? As a result of this, how are we going to thread through the positives to form a longer pathway through into the new normal that together we will co-create? And the other part of this is, whilst there's lots and lots of resources to practically help staff, underpinning all of this, in the words of the Fun Boy 3 and Bananarama as an 80s girl, it's not just what you do, it's the way that you do it, the stance that the adults have taken. And so as a whole collaborative, they've signed into this commitment of how the adults are going to be with each other and with children. And that's all about Dan Hughes' pace, which has been playful, accepting, curious, with real empathy. So really trying to see beyond behaviours, being the detectives, being curious about why a child or an adult might be behaving in a way which we perceive not to be their usual way of communicating a need, and seeing beyond that. And then in terms of being emotionally available to really attune into and validate and make that sort of regulatory response relationship before we try to go into resolve issues. Much of what we do in our special schools, and this is why it's been with great pleasure that both Engage and NAS have been sort of working in a collaboration to be able to support this and share the excellent practice that we have. I've put this quote that Bernard shared with us on Monday about legal cases, and it's about a reasonable body of professionals. And we are that reasonable body of professionals working together, challenging each other, supporting each other to stand with the vulnerability, with also that courage to do the best that we possibly can for our children, for our staff, and for our systems, knowing the more healthy relationships we all have, the more likely we are all going to be able to recover from whatever trauma and experience this may have created for us. And we will, as a result of that, be able to thrive. Relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful form of therapy is human love. And I think that we've got a lot of that. So that's me, and I know we've now got about 10 minutes, so I am going to hand back over to Sue for any other questions and comments from yourselves. And please feel free also to share in the chat, because we can download that later and share that, all of the most amazing work that you guys will be doing in your own setting. So thank you. Sue, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I'm sure we've all got an awful lot from that. Just 3 points I'd like to pick up. All leaders as learners, hope in humanity as it is in knowledge. I know there's lots of other things, but the last bit is classic. It's not just what you do, it's the way that you do it, and I'll certainly remember that one. Hope we all do. A couple of simple questions, I hope. Barry, are you on Twitter?
No,
okay.
But I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay, LinkedIn.
And there is a Facebook group around recovery curriculum.
Okay, thank you for that, Barry. And this question comes from Martin Morman at Ravenscliffe in Happy Halifax. And he asks, because of the government's legislation in terms of being 2 metres apart, what would be your golden nuggets for staff in their bubbles to try and keep school fun and engaging when mixing will be so limited? So golden nuggets, anybody?
Barry, are you going to respond to that?
No, I was letting you do, because you're good at golden nuggets.
I think it's about the relationship, and it almost and injecting in that stance of pace and place that Dan Hughes used to use, because L used to stand for love, but he now says that interweaves within being playful. I saw a short video of 3 members of staff who were back in school preparing for their bubble of children to arrive. And what were those 3 members of staff doing? They were out on the trikes. They were trikes that I would say were probably appropriate for 6-year-olds. They were out having a good old giggle and a laugh as they were cycling around to see where they could then share where the children would go. I know when those children are going to come back in, they're going to have a great time, because it's the way in which the adults will, and it's not necessarily about being gregarious and out there and loud, but it's about being curious and alongside and daring to get down and dirty in that mud, making those cakes alongside with the children, and also being honest and authentic that this is tricky for everybody, but we'll do everything we can to keep each other as safe as possible. I think that's really, really important. Great idea about things like balloons being released. One word of caution, what we've seen an impact environmentally has been absolutely fabulous. Balloons are a beautiful idea in many, many ways, but if you use bubbles, actually that doesn't have the detrimental impact that balloons going off into the environment could well have. So it's almost what we want to do is, for our children, adolescents at this stage, looking at the impact on the environment, let's challenge everything that we're doing so that we pull through those positives. So all of those creative ideas, absolutely brilliant. And let's just think them through so that we are moving into our new normal with that absolute respect for our environment and how each of us respond to it. But great ideas and, sending those kind of things out, just brilliant, brilliant.
Thank you. Back to you, Rich, I think.
Yeah, so there are 4 thank yous from me. The first one is to Barry. Huge thank you, really insightful as always, and just reaffirming so many of the things that we know and believe within Engage. So massive, really positive. Really enjoyed that session. Second thank you is to Sharon. Very similar sessions to the one you did the other day, but just so many resources there, so much insight into how schools can work together, and in the case of the Embark Trust, the special schools working alongside mainstream schools and then benefiting from each other. The third one is to Claire Dora, who's here somewhere. Claire, thank you for helping to publicise this webinar and supporting these Engage and Connect sessions and supplying us with a lot of the information coming from DFE, from SEND bodies, etc., that we were able to push out to our members. Big collaboration with NAS, so thank you for that. And the final one is just to say, just in light of the Engage and Connect session on Monday, where Bernard Allen talked about how we can get things right. And the way that we get things right is by working together. Working together as heads, working together in clusters, working together to support each other so that nobody steps out of line and lands themselves in hot water, but we actually come to a consensus on a way forward. I think we've seen a consensus on the way forward through Barry and Sharon's work today. I think if every school took that on, then we'd be in a much healthier place towards the end of this summer and going into September. So thank you for sharing both. Come and enjoy the benefits of being engaged, because if you're in Engage, that's how we connect with each other and support each other really simply. The chat room will be open for a little bit. So as we sign off now, thank you for coming. There were 164 people on this chat.
Oh, wow.
So Barry, I don't know if that breaks your webinar record, but we're happy to say Engage supported you in getting 164 people trained.
You want the honest answer to that, Rich?
Yes.
Yeah, our school was 1,000.
Right. Thanks. Anyway, 164 people benefited this afternoon. Thank you for attending. Anything else you need in the chat, this will be uploaded onto the Engage website within the next few hours. Thank you, and be safe. Go well. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.